Hey, everybody. Everybody's coming in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Puppets Are Easy, 147 Steps from Idea to Creation. As everyone is coming in, we are going to put everyone on mute, and you can turn off your video if you don't want to be seen by everybody. And yeah, we got a good number of folks here. So first things first, I'm Eric, and Puppet Kitchen is the company that I run. It's a full-service puppetry studio, and we've been running since 2008. I'll talk about more in a second. But Zoom-wise, I'm in New York City right now, and I want to know about where you are. So I want to have you guys type into the chat where you're at. And this also helps you get to find out where the chat screen is and lets me know that that you can all hear me okay. And so type into the chat where you are. And hi, Alicia. Oh yeah, also with me. And that's great. Everybody is typing in where they're from all over. Great. And if anyone was a part of the last workshop that I just did, you could just type into the chat that you loved it. That would be a good way for me to know that you were in the last one. If you have questions about things while I'm presenting, type them into the chat. We're going to keep everybody on mute just to keep the channel clear, and I'll answer things as they come up. We'll also have a chance for questions at the end that's a little more focused. We're recording this meeting so that we can post it later. So just know everybody who's got their video on, we can see you and we'll see you. And hi, Jamie. Hi, Louise. Hello, everyone out there. So I guess did I miss anything? No, we're all good. We're all good to go. So I'm going to start my presentation here. And it just takes me a second to get the right window and then to put the chat back up and all of those things. So just bear with me for a sec. So now I can see everybody. I can see my notes. This is all great. Everything's rocking and rolling. Okay, well, welcome to Puppets Are Easy, 147 Steps from Idea to Creation. I'm Eric Wright. We'll start with something we all know. Puppets are totally easy, right? Well, I've been a professional puppeteer and puppet maker and performer and designer and builder for many years. And I know that there's 147 steps to get from an idea until it's actually not 147 steps. That was really clickbait. And if you're all here because of it, then that's great, it worked. There are a lot more, there can be more steps than that. But let's talk a little bit about what is going on. First, before you begin, know who you are as an artist. And so since I'm giving this presentation, here's a little bit about me and my company, Puppet Kitchen International. First and foremost, I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. I was actually born in Galveston, Texas, but I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. And there isn't a whole lot of puppetry there. There is some, and I saw some stuff. But I was really interested in a lot of different things as a kid. I wanted to be an inventor. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be in the theater. And I found that that puppetry was a way to combine everything that I liked doing and never give any of it up. In 2008, myself and Emily DeCola and Michael Schupak, two puppetry friends of mine, founded the Puppet Kitchen in a studio in the East Village. And we started designing, building, performing, directing, coaching puppets and puppetry for productions all over the world. And that company continues to this day. Over the course of those 10 plus years, I've designed, built, and performed in every puppet style that there is. And I've contributed to over 1,000 productions that have some kind of puppetry in them, whether that's consultation on a production, actually performing in a show, building for a show, building a piece of a show. I've done a lot of productions, and I've worked in a lot of styles. That does not include Vietnamese water puppetry. It's the last on my list. Maybe I'll get there someday. First step, decide on a style. There's a lot of different puppetry styles. The television style is probably the one that you are most familiar with because it gets the most exposure, gets the widest audience. And it's one of the more recent forms of puppetry because it was invented to be on television. This style was adapted from a hand puppet style by Jim Henson to really utilize the frame of the television screen as the proscenium of the theater. As far as construction goes, these puppets are mostly operated from inside. It's like I said, a variation on hand puppets, and it's combined with rod puppets. Sometimes there are live hand puppets like Fozzie Bear or Cookie Monster. There's a lot of variations within this genre, but you're familiar with this one. Second most familiar puppetry style that people know as marionettes, also known as string puppets. There's a picture there of the lonely goat herd scene from The Sound of Music, which is honestly one of my favorite marionette performances of all time. But they're operated on a stage that is built to be the puppet scale, not human scale, not larger than human scale. And they're operated with strings from above. And apparently it's loading. Loading is an unusual style of puppetry. There we go. Direct manipulation is a form of puppetry that is one of my favorites. It has its roots in the Japanese bunraku theater, which you can see on the upper right there, and is characterized by being presented in a larger stage, usually a person-sized stage. The puppets are constructed head to toe, generally, rather than a television puppet, which is often only from the head to waist, and often operated by more than one puppeteer, one person on the head and hand, one person on the hand and back, and one person on the feet. Bunraku theater does differentiate itself from Western-style tabletop puppetry or direct manipulation puppetry in that the Bunraku theater has a 200, 300-year-old tradition and canon, and we play fast and loose with that tradition and experiment a lot with it. They're both exquisite. There's a little picture of little baby Eric right here down in the corner in a production called Hiroshima Maiden. Rod puppets are presented on a puppet-sized stage, and the puppeteer is hidden. They're operated from below. They're basically like reverse marionettes. Hand puppets, you might be familiar with the hand puppets that Fred Rogers used in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Punch and Judy is also one of the more famous hand puppets. They're operated, again, from inside the puppet, and the puppeteer is usually hidden by a constructed puppet stage or a ground row. Parade puppets, again, are for large outdoor venues. You may have seen them in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Not a lot of people know that those puppets, this is one of the original Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade floats, were created by a puppeteer named Tony Sarg in New York, and they were conceived of as reverse marionettes. They're operated by a ton of people on strings from below. This is Bread and Puppet Theater, who has large public demonstration puppets. And this is a 15-foot long lion that we built for the San Diego Zoo. Masks and costume characters do sort of fall into the gray area of puppet style, of what's puppetry and what's not. It is an object that is performed for an audience. It does use the performer the performer is performing through this object, and the attention is more on the object than on the performer. But it is a little bit of a gray area. Remote manipulation puppetry, again, starting to remove farther and farther away from the puppeteer's body. Because of that, they can be presented on any size stage, And they are removed in various ways from the puppeteer's body: cable controls, remote controls, a lot of different ways, including stop motion, which is removed even from standard timescale. Again, stop motion animation is one of those gray areas of puppetry that you don't really think about, but does fall into the same overarching category. Toy theater is a style of puppetry that is completely constructed from paper. And traditionally it was books that you would get of beautiful lithographs that you could punch out like a paper doll, build a theater with all of the characters. It would come with scripts presented. It was sort of like the Victorian Nintendo. And the focus for this kind of puppetry is on storytelling through theatrical blocking and scenic elements rather than on fine character movement. There's only so much you can get out of a little paper figurine moving around the set. But when you present it as a small version of theater, you can really get a lot. And then, of course, there's Vietnamese water puppetry, which is a real style of puppetry that I just have not done. It is characterized by performing the puppets in a pool of water with a curtain separating the puppeteers from the puppets. It's sort of like horizontal rod puppetry. The pool of water acts as a support for the puppets at the end of these long rods, and it also masks puppets that come in and out of the water. So now that we've decided generally what kind of puppet style we want to work in, the next step is to bake a puppet. Now, when you're going about designing puppets, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. In a lot of different puppet designs that I've come across, a good puppet design considers the material that the puppet's going to be made out of, the specific materials. I've made puppets in wood, styrofoam, fabric, fur, found objects that have just been cobbled together, lots of different things. If you're designing a puppet, it's important to be specific about what those materials are. It's important to design some movement into the character. A puppet is an object that performs with movement for an audience. And if your puppet has limited movement, it puts lots of limitations on what you can communicate or how you can use it. It's important to consider scale because the changing scale and being outside the realm of actual human scale is something that is a tool that puppets have to communicate story or to communicate emotion. You can build multiple copies of one puppet in different scales to communicate different ideas. It's important to consider where the performer is, where the puppeteer is going to be, where the audience is going to be, how they're going to view the puppet, whether it's through a screen or whether it's on stage or whether it's in a big field for a parade puppet. It's important, of course, to think about the character of that puppet, the various attributes that character has, and about the production design as a whole. If you're designing a puppet for a larger theatrical production, there's probably an aesthetic that the director is forming with the whole piece. And you want your puppet to live in the world of this production. You want it to be able to look like it fits in this same world. You want to start with the character design aspect of designing a puppet. And that's where you just draw, you sculpt, you collage, you modify existing things, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you have the most experience with, or whatever can translate your ideas into a visual medium is what you should use. And you want to iterate as much as possible during this step when your material choices are more limited. If you sculpt and you just have a big block of clay, you can really easily change that puppet around when you see that it needs changes. And it's better to do that now in the design phase than it is to change a lot of stuff way later when things are built in final materials. You'll never be able to avoid everything. You'll never be able to think of everything before it's built, but you try and do your best. That's where you move into puppet design, where you really think about how this character and what the idea of this character is and what it looks like can be translated into a physical object. This is where you start thinking about how big, like what is it, if it's a hand puppet, what is putting that puppet on a hand going to do to the shape of the body? A lot of times I see characters drawn with like really skinny necks and they're supposed to be TV puppets, and we have to adjust the dimensions of the character because a person's hand can only be so thin and you can't get the exact same proportions. So there's a bit of translation when you think about this object in 3D space. I like to try and think about building the puppet on I think about building the puppet and writing down how I would build it. What really comes first? What comes second? What do you do? How do you gather the materials? What do you have to pattern out? Really think about things on paper. Again, this is like iterating when your materials are cheap. And getting as specific as possible before you start building. If you can, draw a front and a side rendering. Make sure you know exactly what that puppet looks like from the front and exactly what it looks like from the side, and those two things match up so that you're working out the exact details of what that puppet looks like in space before you make it. Again, what colors are you going to use specifically? Where do you get the material? How much are you going to need? This also can change depending on what puppet builder you're working with. If you are working with an experienced builder that you've worked with before, there might be some shorthand that you can use. However, if you are building it yourself, it's important to think about the idea that I'd say make a puppet design that could be given to someone else and they would know what to do with it, because it helps encourage you to be more specific with your design before you start building, rather than trying to build and design at the same time, which is something I really only learned because that's how I used to build and design. And I still struggle with that today. I work with my hands and I make things and design things, and I have trouble imagining what it's going to be like later on down the line. But experience really does help. And you're never going to get all the details figured out ahead of time, but it's still important to figure out as many things as possible before you get into the build phase. So when we're ready to build, think about building puppets 3 times before they're finished. And no creation is ever really finished. The first time you build it, it's just in crumpled paper and tape, disposable materials, something that gives you the idea of the size of the puppet and your relationship to it as a puppeteer. The second time you build it in like materials. If it has a stretchy fabric, then you use a cheap stretchy fabric that you don't mind changing a lot. Focus on that puppet's movement and any restrictions that material is going to impart. And the third time you build it is in the final material. So in this time, you're going to focus on the detail from an audience's perspective. It's really important to know where your audience is going to be and how they're going to be viewing your puppet. If you're building a parade puppet, you might not have to worry about the finer details that you might have to think about for an HD video puppet. If you don't need to worry about those details, then don't build them. Like, they will only bog you down. Speaking of details, or details as some people call them, considering mechanisms is something that people, when they first start building puppets, get really excited about, myself included. I always want to make a blinking eye or a moving eyebrow, or I want to make something that's like a cool mechanical thing. And it's important to think about, I always think about moving through the complex to find an elegant solution. I would be remiss to say that you shouldn't think about those exciting, very complicated mechanical things, because you're all makers. Like, you might also have that kind of engineering mind like I do. You might think of the most incredible, most interesting, coolest thing, the coolest version of the solution. And that's what inspires you to move to like make it an actual object. But honestly, most of the time, I've never found a way to like make that elegant solution first. That excitement about making a detailed thing gets me through the creative process, as long as I don't hold too tightly to one idea and just like really try and make it that one thing. I use those ideas to bolster me through many different ideas. The example I usually give is that a piece of rope often makes the best shoulder joint. when figuring out making a puppet that needs a shoulder joint, and you think about how a human shoulder joint works, and that this ball and socket joint is a crazy piece of engineering, and you need to build your puppet's joint like this, that will really bog you down when a piece of rope here might do you just fine. And it gives you all the movement you need. The limits are put on it by the puppeteer, and it's way more durable and takes way less time to make than a fancy ball and socket joint. Now, the next step is to build your team. Contrary to popular belief, puppets don't work without people. A lot of people seem like when people commission me for puppets, a lot of times what they're looking for is one of those self-working puppets that just works right off the bat and just does what it needs to do and doesn't need a skilled person to work the puppet. Maybe doesn't need a skilled person to direct the puppet. There's a lot of different people that go into making a puppet show possible, or show with puppets possible. Now, sometimes you're working alone and you do a lot of different roles. Sometimes you're working on a small team and you do a couple of roles. Sometimes you're working in a big project where everybody's doing one thing, but there's things like character design, puppet design, like we've talked about. There's the builders, and that builder could be split out to be a costumer, a structures person, someone that just does paint surfaces treatments, someone who just does the sculpting or foam patterning. And then there's, of course, the puppeteer, the person who's actually working the puppet. But there are puppet wranglers and a puppetry director who looks at the puppet from the outside. We'll talk quickly about what those roles are. We talked a little bit about character design. It's just thinking about what that character is and how it lives in the world. The puppet designer is taking that character design and making a recipe for a real world object, how to make a real world object. This is the design for a unicorn puppet that we built for Tom Brown Paris Fashion Week. We sent it to a build shop called Atchison Walsh Studios, and they took the designs that I made and started putting it together. And you can see the finished design here. It's important to have puppet builders that match the style that you're working with, just as much as it's important to have puppeteers who match the style they're working with. Here you can see me with the two models that were puppeteering this unicorn that we built. And a puppeteer, again, performs this finished puppet the same way a guitarist performs through their instrument for an audience. The puppet wrangler is often a term you don't hear very much of, but they do a bunch of things. They work behind the scenes to keep the puppets looking their best. They often make sure they go in and finish little details on set. They prepare puppets before they're on set with props or costumes that they need. They do make minor repairs. They can help puppeteers get into and out of the puppets, and they track what things need to happen next. They are essential to keeping a larger production moving smoothly, and their value cannot be overestimated. And a puppetry director, there aren't really a lot of good pictures of people being puppetry directors because they're behind the scenes. So I mashed up this picture of Jim Henson and Frank Oz and Jerry Jewell, oh boy. Anyway, they're all puppeteering Steven Spielberg because he's a director. Anyway, the puppetry director also can save you a ton of time on set because they act as the liaison between the director and the puppeteer. They're the one that acts a bit like a choreographer. They're not directing the whole production, but they're focused on the more mechanical aspects of the puppetry. They're focused on the puppeteers. They're focused on getting the most out of the puppets that are provided for the production. They are also often the ones that train puppeteers on the particular puppets used in a show. But of course, there's tons of other roles that are needed on a production with puppets, and they all have some input on what the puppets do, how they work, and how they're used in a production. From playwright, director, the production designer, a teamster, the person that drives the truck and loads and unloads the show, a light tech, a sound tech, a stage hand. If you're a solo puppeteer, you might be doing all of these roles yourself. But it's important to make sure you remember that when you're doing each one of these roles, so that when you tell someone else how to do it, you know what their job entails. Last, Puppets need an audience, contrary to popular belief. I really like to think about the character that's formed with a puppet coming from 3 input sources. The performer, the puppeteer, gives a lot of input. And that performer side of the triangle also includes all of the production staff. The puppet has a lot of input into what that character is going to be. It tells you what it can do well and what it can't, how it should be performed, tells you even during performance, it will surprise you with something. Maybe its arm comes off or its arm moves differently than you thought it would. Being open and receptive to what the puppet is telling you makes for a better performance. And then the third component of that is the audience. You need all 3 of these. You need the audience participation. You need the audience to be pouring themselves into your character for it to truly come to life. You see, it's easy. It's just 140 steps, 147 steps, I think. I think we tracked them all. I'm pretty sure I kept track of them. But the last step is make something. The most important step, if you've come to this workshop wondering, how do I get from an idea to creation, the most important part is to just try it. A lot of times when people ask me, how do I get into puppetry or how do I get started in puppetry, it really comes down to a couple of things. Go find people who are doing what you want to do and ask them about it, and do your homework about what the state of the art form is in right now and the history of the art form. Bring something to the table. Do something, try something, show something to somebody. Even if it's not the perfect version of what you want to do, find a way to make something. The puppetry is great in that there are a lot of entry-level places to do just a little something. You can make a 5-minute piece for a puppet slam and present it, and it'll won't be recorded. It'll just be done, but you get a lot of great feedback from it. Obviously, putting something up on YouTube or a video online is a great way to just make something small. Making puppets, if you're a puppet builder, making something out of crumpled paper and tape is a way to just make something rather than waiting to make the perfect thing. And that brings us to the end. I know we breezed through that really quickly. So if you have questions, you can type them into the chat here. Oh, I see a couple of questions already. Great. Do you ever use a general pattern when making hand puppets? Yeah, that's a great question. It's really important to keep track of what you've done in the past and to build on your own work. So I wouldn't say that I've used a general pattern. I would say that I've used patterns from before and modified them. And one pattern from before can be modified into a lot of different puppets. But you should be thinking about it in a larger sense, because I don't just work with hand puppets or TV style puppets. I work with a lot of different styles. And it's important to use what you've worked with before and things that you're comfortable with to get you past that block on making the perfect thing. Use a rope joint for a shoulder if you know that a rope joint works. And if it needs to be adjusted later, then you can adjust it later. Linus asked, do I mainly do comedy shows or not? Well, that's a good question. Are you laughing or not? Oh, he's probably asking about, Linus is probably asking about puppet shows, in which case I would say I've done as many different kinds of puppets as I've used. That's as many different kinds of puppet shows that I've been a part of. This image you're looking at here is from Animal Farm, a musical with puppets. And it wasn't much of a comedy. To see more of our work, you can visit us on our website at puppetkitchen.com. If you want to follow us on Instagram, we're at The Puppet Kitchen. I do a live show every Wednesday called Puppet Time Online, where I talk to people who are in and often on the outside of the puppetry community to see what their experience is like and to get to hear about what they know about. And if you want to donate to the Puppet Kitchen, there's a PayPal link there. This workshop is free. I love being a part of Virtually Maker Faire. If you want to support this small business during the time of COVID-19, then send us some love. I'm really, really happy that you guys have come and joined me today. And if you make something, send it to us. Contact@puppetkitchen.com is our email address. We can put all of these links in the chat. They were at the top of the chat, so you can scroll up and get it there. But it's been great having you all with me. Thank you so much.